So I really want to talk about how to actually deal with conflict with your professor or anybody else in your life. And this is really essential for understanding negotiations in terms of where you want to go. And we all experience conflict. That's kind of what life is about. We have an uncertain objective often, and we're trying to figure out how to get to that particular objective. And we're kind of all navigating towards this kind of ambiguous goal. And so the goal is to get people to understand your perspective. So whether it's professor or somebody else that you're in a management position, that you're getting them to understand where you're coming from and then realize on how to actually accomplish that particular goal. And I know it's really difficult often when you're talking to somebody in a position of authority. And so this is where negotiation is actually really, really important, and sort of the skills of understanding how to actually get there and to deal with conflict. So I really want to talk about that today. So the key is to come into the situation as if you are trying to get both people to learn about this particular ambiguous thing that you are thinking about, whatever your particular goal is, right? So it's not coming into the situation. We often think of negotiations in terms of this adversarial approach, right? We think of I'm right and they're wrong. Well, if you take a step back, and I know that this is often very hard to do, you have to take a step back and say, hey, you know what? Maybe neither of us are right. Maybe I'm more right than the other person, but maybe neither of us are right. And how do I get people to arrive upon that particular solution where neither of us are right? And we have to come to a sort of satisfactory solution. And it's hard to sort of do that. But what you have to do is often walk people through as if they are on a learning journey, rather than taking this adversarial approach where you are coming from a particular stance. But instead, it's much more of an education journey, or thinking about how to walk somebody through to where you are coming from the same situation. Now, the other thing that you need to realize is that the other person on the other end, they might not be thinking in the same way that you are, obviously, right? They have a lot of priorities. So if you're thinking from a perspective of a professor, they're often thinking about how do I accomplish something in my career so I don't lose my job. And that's really what it is, right? Like that's ultimately, they have all sorts of different priorities. I know it's sort of hard to think about this, but they really do have a lot of different priorities, just like you. You have lots of stuff going on in your life. And so they're not necessarily thinking about the same issue in the same way that you are. And so what you need to do is come back to understanding that, hey, this person is maybe not in the same boat that you are. And if that's the case, what do I have to do to communicate and understand, get them to understand where I'm actually coming from? So, what you need to do is come from a sort of a position or thinking through in almost a sympathetic way or an empathetic way, where you're thinking about the other person and you're getting them to walk along where you are right now and getting them to see exactly the moments where you're getting hung up. Now, I can't guarantee that you're going to get a satisfactory solution from your perspective. That's often difficult to sort of imagine that you are always going to come out in a satisfactory way. And often that doesn't happen that way. But you come out of it from a position of understanding is a much more robust position. And so the key when you're doing this is to always think about the other person and being empathetic to the other person and thinking of, okay, I know that they're stressed out. I know that they have lots of stuff going on. How do we walk through so that we come up with a fair and open and honest result? Now, as I mentioned, it might not necessarily be the thing that you're thinking of, but at least it is a fair and open and honest result. And if somebody is putting you in a position where you feel uncomfortable with something, then by all means, you can actually go and talk to somebody. How do you deal with this? And there's lots of people that will walk you through, whether it is perhaps, another faculty member someplace and saying, hey, how do I deal with this? Or maybe you talk to a counselor, maybe you talk to somebody at the university or wherever you are. Maybe you talk to a parent and say, how do I navigate this? And we want to get to the same result. Now, if you come from a perspective of intimidation, you're almost always going to end up in a not a great result, right? If you're coming from anger or intimidation, the sort of typical things that we think about, it's never going to really work out for either party involved and multiple parties involved, and people get really upset. So instead, you're thinking of this as a way to get everybody to understand where you're coming from. And perhaps you might not get the result that you're thinking about, right? So perhaps you're thinking of like, how do I get somebody to understand the grade that I would like, given this situation that I actually have? And if that's the case, you kind of have to walk them through where you're coming from. And then the other thing to think about from the empathetic viewpoint, right, is to think that they have all these demands. How do I provide a solution so that it becomes easier for them in the future? It makes their life easier in the future. And having that solution is going to help you out in sort of coming from a better position of, basically a position of power where you're providing a solution that's going to be helpful to somebody because they are already overwhelmed. So that's where I want you to come from a position of understanding, of realizing that often there's not really a right answer out there. There's a better answer, but we have to sort of arrive upon what is a sort of fair or just outcome based on how we actually get there. And I think if you take this approach, if you take much more of the empathetic, or you're thinking about the other person, you're thinking of sort of getting them to understand or learn your perspective rather than the feelings of anger, anxiety, all those kind of things that you have. And maybe that is the case, right? But you're coming from the perspective is like, let's slow this down and walk this through to get somebody else to understand where I'm coming from. So this is how you negotiate or think about things to get a better result. And everybody is typically a lot more understanding, or you'll get a better result often by doing that. And yes, in this professor, or this particular position, you might not get the result you want. But if you repeatedly do this, and this is a long-term game. So you repeatedly do this with many people, it actually plays out in the long run, because it's a much better position of power for you to come from that direction than it is to come from a perspective of anger and anxiety and all those kind of emotions that we have, and we all have them. And coming from that position, and you repeatedly do that over and over again with different moments where there's conflict, you actually do a lot better in the long run. All right, take care. Hopefully this helps you out. By the way, give me a thumbs up if you like this video. Do subscribe to the Reciprocity YouTube channel. All right, take care. Bye.